Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very glad to welcome all of you here for our side event organized by RAED, the Arab Network for Environment and Development, together and in partnership with the Norwegian Refugee Council, the NRC. The side event comes under the title of Consideration of Climate and Disaster-Induced Human Mobility within National Strategies and Policies. As you can see, or whoever received the invitation, we will have a number of distinguished presenters and speakers. We are expecting Dr. Mahmoud Fathallah, the head of the the Council of the Arab Ministers responsible for the environment and also climate change. He has to be in another meeting, and he will finish and join us before we end the presentations. And we're expecting also, and it was confirmed, to have Mr. Fadi Jannan representing the UN Disaster Risk Reduction Regional Office for the Arab States. He is actually the deputy chief of the office, but unfortunately he had also to go with his boss for another meeting anyway. But I'm very happy to have with us from NRC over the, I don't know if we can see Nina. Are you online, Nina? We can see your, you there online? Yes, I can see Nina. She's saying hi. Yes, Nina, hi. Nina Birkland from NRC. She is now, I think, in Geneva, and she will be with us online. And I have here on the table with me, I have also my friend and colleague Samah Hadid from NRC Regional Office in Amman, Jordan. And I have also with us Alice Baya from the IDMC Internal Displacement Center in Geneva as well. And I'm happy also to have with us my friend and colleague Mary-Therese Saif, the head of HEAD. The head of HEAD. HEAD is the name of the organization, and she is the head of the organization called HEAD in Lebanon. And I'm very glad to be together with you all in this session. Let me first start by telling about the idea of this session. In fact, RAED, the Arab Network for Environment and Development, started to be engaged in the implementation of what we know before as the Hyogo Framework of Action. The Hyogo Framework of Action, the framework that, because of this framework, we established the UN disaster risk offices everywhere, and we have the headquarters in Geneva. But at this time, RAED realized that there are many communities, and we discovered that there are many communities that are affected by the climate and by disasters. And one of the risks that we are facing in the region, in the Arab region, is the risk of displacement and mobility. Honestly, when we started discussing this in 2006 or 2007, people were looking at RAED as if we are talking about, something that it is completely strange from, what we are doing in development and environmental protection and so on. But at that time, we started to have also some other partners to discuss, and we found that, the issue of displacement is getting also at the global level is getting, more supporters, and more people are thinking about it and also putting a lot of energy about in this area. And in this regard, we also started with NRC a partnership. In the beginning of the last decade, we started a partnership to make a small study on some areas that could be threatened and have the risk of displacement and mobility in Egypt and Sudan. And then we realized that the risk is there. And the government, for example, the government of Egypt at that time, when we were discussing the issue of displacement, we in the beginning, it was very sensitive. But now I can tell you that we can see the Egyptian delegation talking about mobility and displacement in a very easy way, and they see the issue that is really important for for the Egypt and for the region, and also for not only the Arab states, but also for Africa. And here we realize that we need to work all together on policies at national level. And these policies will be able to think about how we can manage the situation. Of course, we would love and we would like to see communities are not displaced. We would like to be from the beginning preventing this of happening. But once it's happening, it is actually part of the solution for the people who are affected. So we should not look at the people who are displaced as they are, people who are doing something, illegal, but actually they are doing something legally correct, and it's good for their survival and also for their livelihood, sustainable livelihood. So this is why when we are talking about issues related about national policies here in this session, we are talking about what we can do as preventive, but we can do also as responsive measures that we can take with the issues related to displacement and human mobility due to the climate and disasters. So, but from the experience we had in the last almost 17 years now since we start talking about the issue, we realized that there should be partnerships happening at all levels. And this is why when we were designing this side event, we were trying also to have this partnership appearing in the composition of the speakers. So we have the League of Arab States at the regional political body in the Arab region, and we have the research coming from the IDMC. We have international organizations like NRC. We have the civil society also at the regional level as RAED, and we have an example coming from the grassroots level or from one country. This is the case that we are going to hear from Lebanon. I'll try to give everyone 7, 8 minutes to present, to make their speeches or presentations. But before I do that, I would like to give the floor to Nina to give also her welcoming remarks for this session. Nina, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Emad, and thank you everyone for both joining in the room and also online. I would like to also very much thank you, our co-organizers, RAED and the League of Arab States, for this side event, and I'm very happy that we're able to have this discussion around how to integrate displacement and human mobility in national and regional policies. As I think we've heard a lot already at COP, climate and disaster displacement has devastating social and economic impacts on individuals and communities. We know it's one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century. And it also raises many protection concerns and undermines development gains. We know it's continued to rise, and this is also outlined by IPCC. What we do also see and have practiced over several years is that both climate change adaptation and DRR, disaster risk reduction, can play a very important role in preventing and reducing the risk of displacement. It strengthens people's resilience, address the protection needs of people who already moved or are in a way of moving in the context of climate change. Despite all of this effort, we also know that there are many efforts taking place in the Arab region, as outlined by Dr. Emad. The Arab Mechanism on DRR, led by the League of Arab States, the Department of Housing, Water and DRR, the UNDRR's office in Cairo, work with the Arab civil society major groups, and this is work being carried forward. But still, we need to know more to be able to address displacement in the context of climate change on national and regional level in the Arab region. And to do this, RAED and NRC have joined forces to try to develop even more knowledge to have better protection of displaced people. We're doing a mapping where we are looking together on national and DRR strategies, climate change adaptation policies, and also those under the climate change negotiations as NAPs and INDCs. And in this way, we hope to be able to both see what's happening, but also find new entry points for further action and practice on human mobility and displacement in the Arab region. To do this work, we have to have knowledge, but we also need to be clear on how to be concretely integrated in policy work. And to do this, we've worked with UNDRR for many years on something called the Words into Action on Disaster Displacement. And here we have various tools that are available in Arabic, English, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. And these tools are both developed and used by many partners. RAED is a key one, UNDRR. Within the UN, we have IM and UNHCR, and of course IDMC, NRC, and the Platform on Disaster Displacement. I think when we talk with the parties and negotiators here at COP, there's 3 messages related to displacement we should really try to carry forward together. It is that firstly, displacement is an indicator of economic and non-economic loss and damage that individuals and communities are suffering. Second, displacement is a damage or loss in itself. It's linked with people being forced to leave their homes and communities, and thereby depriving them of their rights to choose where and how to live. And finally, displacement is also a driver of loss and damage. And as stated by IPCC, displacement generates an increased vulnerability in natural and human systems in the context of climate change. That concretely means that the finance mechanisms on loss and damage should cover the occurrence as well as the impacts of displacement. We saw that this is in the text that was endorsed earlier this week at the COP. What we now need is that the funds is being filled with billions and not only millions to really make a difference for people who are displaced or at the risk of displacement. Finally, work on disaster displacement and human mobility should be included and mainstreamed into all climate change policy works and in all climate change action efforts, whether here at UNFCCC or in regional organizations and national governments. And we really hope that a continued collaboration with RAED and the League of Arab States can help us to improve on this. And we as NRC and IDMC, we are ready to support League of Arab States, UNDRR, and RAED to take steps also in the Arab region. Thank you. Back to you, Dr. Emad.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nina, for your, first of all, guidance for the issue also, and giving an overview on what's going on and what we have done through the cooperation we have between RAED and NRC. We are very much looking forward to see how we are, the mapping project we are doing together and the region that will lead to some good ideas for the future on how we can enhance the regional strategy on climate-induced displacement. I'm also happy that you have put the emphasis on the issue and the link between the displacement and the loss and damage, because it is actually a result, the loss and damage we get out of the climate change is very clear in the displacement happening in many of the communities that are affected by the impact of climate change. So thank you very much, and please be with us, because I'm sure there will be some question and answers, and we will like to hear from you in case we have Q&A related to you. Now, let me move to NRC at the regional level and ask Samah to give us her perspective about and experience about how we were able in some countries at the regional level maybe to enhance the policies and strategies at the national level to deal with the displacement and especially when it comes to climate and disasters. Samah, you have the floor.
Hello, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Emad. Well, human rights is a crucial part of climate justice. And as this event is taking place in the Middle East and is also about the Middle East, we have to mention the war on Gaza to start with. Civilians are paying a huge price for the ongoing bombardment and hostilities in Gaza, and we are calling for an urgent and lasting ceasefire to save lives and civilian life in Gaza. This region has long been affected by conflict-induced displacement, and now people who have been displaced by conflict face the risk of additional displacement by climate change. And this is something that the Norwegian Refugee Council is finding more and more through our research on the ground. Displacement affected people, host communities alike, are among the population that have contributed the least to climate change, and yet they are the most exposed to climate change impacts and the least supported. We're seeing this across the region. Through our research in Iraq, to start with, we're seeing that climate change is definitely impeding economic recovery and leading to secondary displacement. This year, we surveyed farmers across the country, and 60% of the farmers that we interviewed struggle with water shortages and reduced crop yield. And it's forcing them to leave their agricultural areas in search of work elsewhere. For the 1.2 million people still displaced by conflict, these people who've returned to their areas of origins are also facing extreme drought. And this is adding immense pressure on very vulnerable population groups. One woman that we've interviewed that always comes to mind is Samira from Mosul, who was an IDP who was displaced by conflict, returned to her land, her agricultural livelihood in order to recover and improve her economic situation. She faced drought, she faced destroyed crops, which placed a huge burden on her livelihood and has forced her to flee again. And she told us desperately, how can I do this yet again? How can I flee and be displaced when I'm an old woman? I don't have the resources or the support. And her story, I think, represents many across Iraq, but also the region, of people who, as a result of conflict, have weakened resources and coping mechanisms to deal with the devastation of climate change. We're seeing this in Syria as well, where we've also surveyed communities across all of Syria around how they're dealing with extreme drought. And the story is sadly the same. They are struggling, and they're not getting the resources that they need. In Libya this year, we responded to Storm Daniel, which sadly killed and displaced thousands in eastern Libya. And climate change definitely played a role in the mass flooding that we saw there and the extreme weather events. This particular area in North Africa is vulnerable to extreme weather events, and unfortunately, without the infrastructure and systems in place, it will remain vulnerable to climate change. And there are serious gaps here. Whilst we're seeing, and thankfully, we're seeing more voices emerge from the region on the need to tackle the impact of climate change on displaced populations and host communities, we're not seeing the resources from the international community to support this. The Loss and Damage Fund that has been now set up is a positive development, but it needs to be filled, and filled fast. And the funds that have been pledged need to be increased. These funds as well need to ensure that they reach conflict and displacement affected communities. We need to ensure that all financing that's pledged, both loss and damage, adaptation, reaches those on the front lines of the climate crisis. And those people include displacement and conflict affected people in places like the Middle East and North Africa. So this is, I think, a huge gap, especially as this region is among the most vulnerable to climate change impacts, and yet it's the smallest recipient of climate financing still. So that needs to be addressed urgently. We also need to enhance our data and monitoring on the impacts of climate change on displacement. We have really great organizations like IDMC and IOM and others that are trying to track this, but I think more investment is needed on a national governmental level, and national governments need resources and technical expertise to support these efforts. And I think, as Emad and Nina mentioned in their comments, displacement affected communities need to be part of the policy-making frameworks and the discussions and discourse on a national level. Local actors, displacement affected communities need to be recognized in all national policies, but also on the international stage as well. We've for years been calling on the COP presidencies to amplify the cause and the focus of displacement and human mobility. Sadly, it hasn't featured strongly as part of the agenda. And we can't afford to wait until we see thousands upon thousands of people flee because of climate change and natural disasters. We need to act now. And so I think that we need to see more urgency coming from the COP presidencies and states. And lastly, I'll just say that all policy responses has to be done in consultation with those most affected. Climate action, planning for human mobility, has to be done hand in hand with those who suffer the worst consequences of this. And these communities cannot be left behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samah. Yes, these communities we cannot leave them behind, and we have to include them in our policies. But not only because in most of the cases we find policies and strategies only words on paper, but we need this to be really converted into actions, and you will never have actions without, as you said, the resources and the capacity. And I thank you very much that you took in your first part of your speech the issue of Gaza. Just for the information of some people who are not aware about RAED, but RAED has organized a number of activities in the last month. And we have issued different statements asking for this, to cease fire and, to protect the Palestinian people because what's going on in this region is unfortunately unaccepted, and it's something that it never happened in any other part in the world. So thank you very much, Samah, for raising this as well. Now I will go to the very important part of the discussion when we are thinking about displacement, and people are always looking at how what is the magnitude of this issue. Is really displacement is an issue that we need to have in mind, or it's something very little that we should not put all this energy and effort. But in fact, the internal displacement monitoring center, the IDMC, which I am proud that very lately I became one of the advisory group of this center, have been working as a research arm for the NRC, for the Norwegian Refugee Council, on the issue of displacement, and they were able to report and also make a lot of research and studies on different parts in the world about displacement, and especially when I talk about internal displacement in many regions. So I would like to hear from Alice how she finds the IDMC and how the IDMC can see the issue of displacement, how it could be taken into consideration when we are talking about policies at regional or national level. Alice, you have the floor. Thank you,
Emad. First of all, thank you for inviting me to join the panel and bring also the perspective from IDMC. And so, Emad already introduced that the work we are doing, we are a center of expertise. So the work we do is mainly to look at data and to produce evidence and research and analysis on both the drivers, but also the patterns and the impact of displacement, because it's true that, we talk more and more about the topic of displacement and how climate change and disasters are affected population and leading them to move. But there is also a lot of things that we still don't know. So it's very important, and maybe that will be my first point. It's really that we need policies to address this phenomenon, but we need evidence-based policies, because without that research, without that evidence, we cannot develop policies that tailor to the needs of the population. So it's extremely important to spend a few minutes maybe to explain what we know, but also the type of data that is needed actually to develop such policies at national, but also at regional and global levels. So maybe what we know, and regarding the scale of internal displacement, IDMC only look at internal displacement, so I will not speak about cross-border movement. There are other organizations that try to assess the scale, but for IDMC, we just look at internal displacement, and actually when I say just, it's already a lot, because we know that actually impacts from climate change and disasters are mainly driving people to move within borders, meaning that we also need national policies to address this phenomenon at national level, because I mean, there is still very little evidence today of people crossing a border in this context. And so regarding the scale, I mean, just for last year, IDMC recorded more than 32 million displacement due to disasters. It's a lot. And actually last year was a record year because if you look at these 32 million, a quarter of them were only due to flooding in Pakistan. That was the biggest disaster displacement event that we ever recorded since we collect data on disaster displacement, which is for last 15 years now. And on average, since 2008, it's about 25 million per year displacement that we report only in the context of disasters. It's 2 to 3 times more than the number of displacement we report for conflict. So it's already, I mean, disasters are already a key driver of displacement, and this is all regions of the world and included in the Middle East and North Africa. Maybe just a word on the region specifically. So I have colleagues who work specifically on this region, do research, collect data, and they would be much better placed than me to speak about this. But I mean, I would say that something a bit characteristic of the MENA region is that the scale of conflict displacement, it's true, is still much higher than the scale of disaster displacement. And this conflict displacement tend to even undershadowed, I would say, the impact of disasters and climate change. But Salma was completely true. The people who are displaced in the region because of conflict suffer additional vulnerabilities, because in addition to being displaced by conflict or other sources of violence, they are also exposed to climate change. And that leads to a situation of protracted displacement, secondary displacement, and a spiral of vulnerability in which people struggle a lot to get out. So those policies are even more important to help and support those people to end displacement and to get out of this spiral of vulnerability. And actually this overlapping between conflict and disaster is quite visible in the MENA region. It's visible in other regions, and it's something that is becoming more and more frequent. I mean, we know that, for instance, I mean, based on IDMC data, again, there is 95% of the new conflict displacement across the world today that takes place in places that are also extremely vulnerable to climate change. So there is a clear overlap today between different type of crises that reinforce the vulnerabilities of people. And Salma was talking about Iraq, but Yemen is another example of that. I mean, after several years of conflict, people last year suffered from heavy rain and flash floods, and people who were already displaced by the conflict in Yemen have been forced to move again because of flooding in the place where they were already displaced. And in addition to being displaced, they were also exposed to waterborne disease because the flooding has contaminated the water, so people did not have access to drinking water anymore. So we see, well, in different contexts, this overlapping of different factors. But even if we have those these different cases, there is also a lot of data that still are lacking to really fully understand the different drivers of displacement and drivers of risk and drivers of vulnerabilities. And so maybe just to say a few words about the type of research and the type of data that we really need to invest our resources to get those data and research. I would say that the first point is that if you really want to inform national policies with evidence and data on that phenomenon, we need contextualized research. That's a first point that is very important. We still strongly like case studies that really look in depth at the very concrete and contextualized specificities of each context. And we know that, I mean, climate change is going to impact differently people depending on the context. So we need that evidence so that each national policy, local policy can look at and address those specificities. So that requires in-depth analysis, that requires risk profile. That's something that we do also at IDMC, where we work with specific countries to do this risk profile so that we can really have a better understanding of this specific context. I also support what Salma was saying, that we need participatory and research and inclusion of the local knowledge. We need to look at the people's needs and their expectation, especially, for instance, when we look at policies like, I mean, some things that we talk more and more to address displacement are planned relocation. It can be very sensitive politically, but still it's something that we are more and more considering for people who are living on territories that we know at some point are going to become not livable anymore. And if we want to implement planned relocation processes that are sustainable, that are human rights based, we need to include the affected population in the decision making of such policies. We also need, in that, I mean, because displacement, I mean, climate change is one driver, but it's not the only driver that is leading to displacement. And I think it's still, I mean, even if we are today at COP28, we are here, of course, to fight against climate change, to collectively do climate action together, but we also need to acknowledge that there are other factors today that are exacerbating vulnerabilities of people, and so climate change is one of them. It's amplifying other factors that are more due to development and poverty and many other factors. So we need to mainstream these issues in different types of policies. We need to look at climate policies, but we also need to look at disaster risk reduction policies, development policies, and many other types. So there is no one-size-fits-all approach. I mean, we need a set of policies to address this. And just maybe to conclude with a few words on also some, in my view, I mean, we need data and research to support the development and implementation of policies, but we also need those data to support the programming, like intervention on the ground to support and to assist those people when they are displaced. And for that, we also need to look at and to get different types of data. I mean, and we need that for all the phases of displacement. And I would say there is three main phases. I mean, there is a prevention and the preparedness phase. So before the displacement happens, then there is the assistance phase, and there is the last one, which is more like to look at durable solution for these people. And we need different types of data for each of these phases, and these data are still extremely lacking today. So just to give an example, for instance, to inform the prevention of disaster displacement, climate change related displacement, we need, for instance, to better understand the seasonality of disasters. We know that, for instance, disasters happen at certain moment of the year, but we need to better understand this seasonality so that we can also better monitor these disasters, and we can also inform the preparedness of these disasters so that we can better position also, for instance, humanitarian items when we know that a disaster is going to happen. We also need to look at displacement risk. I mean, a question that we often have is how many persons are going to be displaced tomorrow? I mean, honestly, we don't know. And so we need to also invest in disaster risk, displacement risk modeling to also assist governments to better understand the future risk of displacement so that they can also develop policies that are going to help to anticipate and to be prepared for that, because I still believe that the scale of displacement today is already very important. It's going to be even more important tomorrow, and we are not yet prepared today to address it properly. And there are a couple of other data like this that we're still lacking. I mean, to provide assistance for population, we also need disaggregated data. I mean, and disaggregated data, or today, we still struggle to get disaggregated data on women who are displaced, on children, on people with disabilities. And if we want to effectively assist those persons when they are displaced, we need to know exactly who are the most vulnerable, where they are located, what are their specific needs, so that the policies and intervention can also target these specific groups. And this type of data is still lacking today. And I'm going to conclude because I think... but maybe the last phase that is more to look at the durable solution phase is that we also need for that, I think, much more research on the long-term socio-economic impact of displacement. I mean, we still, usually when a disaster happens and a displacement occurs, humanitarian actors, they collect data a couple of weeks, 1 month, 2 months maybe after a disaster, and then the data collection stops. And so meaning that we also usually don't know what happens to these people after a couple of weeks or months because we just stop collecting data. So I think it's very important also to maybe involve more the development actors in this, because they can be the one also at some point continuing this data collection on a more longer term. And it would be also extremely important to better understand on the longer term what are the needs of the person who remain displaced, especially when they are trapped in protracted displacement situation. And that would also relevantly inform policies and assistance for this person, not only in the short term, immediately after a disaster happened, but also on a longer term. And that would support the development of durable solutions so that these people can also maintain their livelihood and restore their livelihoods, restore their lives, and end the displacement. And all of this data, and I will conclude on that, I mean, we are talking a lot about loss and damage today at COP28. Salma was right, and Nina said it also in her opening remarks. Displacement is probably one of the greatest illustration of loss and damage today. And there is an opportunity also with now this adoption of the loss and damage fund. I mean, there is an inclusion of displacement in the COP decision. There is an inclusion of the displaced person, the migrants, the refugees. So we have also an opportunity to make sure that this money that will come for loss and damage also help to address displacement, also help to support displaced population. But for this, again, we need to document this. We need to provide the data and the research that is needed to really inform this loss and damage discussion and finance. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Alice. You have given, the very broad view about the whole situation. It's not only, of course, we have to agree that without data, without information, no one can make any decision, no policy could be developed or designed, and no action also could be achieved. So, but to have the data, it's not easy. It is a process that needs not only the researchers or the people who can do it, but also the systems and the enabling environment that will provide enough support for the data collection and for the different research centers or civil society organizations, universities, to be able to do that. So we still need, again, we will go back to the same point that Samah raised about resources and capacity. But definitely what Alice said about the issue of putting the displacement clearly as part of the loss and damage, it is also another, I don't want to say fight, but it is going to be also an issue to include the displacement as part of the loss and damage, because it has to be like this, and we have to consider it as part of as a very clear manifestation of the loss and damage. We did not yet get Dr. Mahmoud Fathallah, the head of the Council of Arab Ministers, the Secretariat of the Council of Arab Ministers responsible for environment and climate change. But let me tell you some of the issues that I know that he has been raising in different places. And I quote what they have in the League of Arab States, that the League of Arab States has already issued their regional strategy on DRR, on disaster risk reduction. And in this strategy, it's very clear from the beginning that one of the main risks that we are facing in the region is the displacement and mobility due to the climate risks and also disasters. What Nina has mentioned, and I want to repeat here again, that we have started this mapping process through which we are going to engage also IDMC and NRC and RAED with the League of Arab States. We are trying to have through this mapping to understand what are drivers and what are going on in the different countries, first of all on policies and strategies related to displacement, and second later, and we will see what are the capacities required to go further and study the displacement risks in the different countries and in different hotspots. So this means that we have a lot of work to do, and I still believe that maybe Dr. Mahmoud will join and say something before we finish the panel. But now I would like to give the floor to my colleague and friend, Engineer Mary-Trace Saif, to give us her presentation about a case study from Lebanon on how national policies could be affected by disasters and how disasters could affect also national policies in the case of Lebanon. Please, Mary-Trace, you have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Emad. Climate change is the most prominent crisis of our time, and disaster-inducing displacement is one of its most serious consequences. Entire segments of the population are already suffering the brunt of the effect of climate change, but the number of vulnerable people living in some countries are the most vulnerable and affected by conflict. Refugees' issue of displacement and stateless people are the forefront of people affected by climate-related emergency. The successive effect of the crisis caused by climate change affect already destitute communities. The consequences of climate change are multiple, many of which lead to displacement, which deter living conditions or hinder to return of people who have already been displaced. Limited natural resources such as drinking water are becoming scarce in many areas of the world that host refugees, like my colleague said. Livestock and crops struggle to survive as climatic conditions become extremely hot and dry, threatening livelihoods. In such cases, climate change plays a role that double risk increase the livelihood of conflicts. Environment change have also been a cause of human migration. If we want to talk about our region in Gaza, especially now, while climate change is seen as a key driver of displacement and conflict, it is equally important to recognize the reciprocal nature of this relationship, and the conflict accelerate the climate change. The continuous of aggressive bombardment, coupled with the deployment of internationally prohibited weapons, increasing environmental degradation that leads to enduring impact on ecosystem, including biodiversity and natural resources. If we see the impact of conflict and the phosphoric white bomb on soil, we see that it's a big impact. Analysis of phosphorus white bombs impact on soil, the use of phosphoric bombs in conflict has several implications for soil quality and composition. Phosphorus residue can persist in the soil, impacting its fertility and posing long-term environmental hazard. If we take a case study in Lebanon, the displacement dilemma, an interdisciplinary study on the socio-scientific impact of forced migration resulting from natural resources, disasters, wars, and conflict, we see that the intricate web of social, environmental, and economic challenge faced by displacement individual using the flow migration to Lebanon as a case study is very, very bad, especially in agriculture, the migration of rural population to urban area leading to several environmental consequences. The soil is vulnerable to erosion and decreasing fertility. The conversion of agricultural land into urban spaces contribute to the loss of biodiversity affecting both fauna and flora. If we talk about impact on food security and economic stability, the neglect of agricultural lands has a direct impact on food security and economic stability, both locally and globally, in food insecurity and economic disparity. And if we want to talk about social impact of displacement, trauma and mental health issue among displacement population, economic disparity, strain on social infrastructure, and lead to social tension and conflict in host community. Displacement is a major issue in the Middle East and North Africa region, with 12 million displaced people, including 5 million children as a result of conflict. Displaced people are more likely to face more conflict and violence, along with high mortality rate due to lack of shelter, food, and adequate resources. Women, children, people of determination, and people living in already poor community are also more vulnerable to displacement and further difficulty due to limited networks and state resources allocated to them. Children are particularly more vulnerable to abuse, violence, and exploitation. If we talk about environmental impact also, water scarcity, like everybody talk about it, increased demand for water resources in urban area, overwhelming sanitation system in urban center, and impact on food security and loss of biodiversity. And we have also many impact of conflict from the phosphor white bombs and soil quality. This impact will be for long-term consequences for agricultural productivity, distribution of local ecosystem, and biodiversity. Now, if we want to talk about the role of government and non-government organizations, NGO, in addressing climate-induced youth displacement and human mobility, especially in the context of national strategy involving considering various aspects. The role of the government is very important. Climate-responsive policies. Government play a pivotal role in crafting policies that address climate change and its impact on youth displacement. These policies should consider factors like environmental resilience, sustainable development, and social equity. For youth-centric strategy, tailoring policies, especially for youth, such as education program, skill development initiative, and employment opportunity, can help mitigate the impact of displacement. There is many disaster perhaps and response can get it by the government. Government should invest in and implement effective early warning system for natural disaster, having robust plan, minimize the impact on youth and vulnerable population. Even government can invest in climate resilient infrastructure, including houses, schools, and healthcare facilities to better withstand the impact of extreme weather events and reduce displacement risk. Implementing sustainable urban planning practice can help manage urbanization and minimize displacement risk associated with climate change. We need the international cooperation to help these people also. Government should engage in international collaboration to address shared challenge and support joint effort in managing youth displacement. The role of NGOs here is very big also. NGOs can implement a program that empowering local community, particularly youth, to actively participate in climate adaptation and resilience building activity. Can help also to providing training and resources to youth community. NGOs can lead awareness campaign to educate communities and can advocate for policies that address the root causes of climate and youth displacement and promote sustainable solution. NGOs play a critical role in providing immediate assistance, including shelter, food, and medical aid. NGOs can offer long-term support through rehabilitation and reconstruction efforts, ensuring the sustainable recovery of affected community. NGOs can conduct research to assess the impact of climate change on youth displacement, providing valuable data to inform policies and intervention. Ongoing monitoring and evaluation of programs help NGOs refine their approach, ensuring they remain responsive to evolving climate change. Government can integrate the expertise and insight on NGOs into the development and implementation of national strategy and collaborate between government bodies, NGOs, and private sector fosters a multi-stakeholders approach to addressing climate-reducing youth displacement and maximize resources and expertise. Finally, by embracing a collaborative and inclusive approach, both government and NGOs can contribute significantly to building resilience, reducing displacement risk, and ensuring sustainable outcome for women, youth, and community affected by climate change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marie-Thérèse, for your presentation. It actually covers the issue in a very general way, and also covered the topic from the different perspectives. And of course, we all join, your fears, and all. I think everyone here join the fears of the conflicts that we have in the region. And thank you for what you have presented as recommendations for the way forward. I know that we have Nishani. Where are you, Nishani? Oh, yes, I can see. Oh, sorry. I would like Nishani is from ICVA, Jayamaha, and Nishani, I want you to give us your perspective about the link that we have done here about with the loss and damage, and we talk about displacement. Please, if you want to join, yes, please. Here on the podium, yes, please. And you can introduce also your work as well.
Thank you. Sorry, I feel a bit on the spot, but happy to be here and really interesting, rich discussions. My name is Nishani Jayamaha. I'm with the International Council of Voluntary Agencies. We're a humanitarian NGO network that is bridging, looking at linking humanitarian climate action and also looking at how do we work across the nexus. And this conversation is really key because there are a few points and reflections maybe to make on what I heard, but also what we're working on. One of the things I think we see is the loss and damage conversation that's happening is crucial to displacement because displacement is part of, as you said, is a part of this loss and damage. The loss and damage conversation for the future is where we need to, I think, do a lot of influence and also advocate for inclusion of communities who are displaced to be able to access be it funding, technical expertise, and also be incorporated into decision making. And this is something as ICWA we are advocating, and we work with CAN International and our network of ICWA. We've been working on a loss and damage call for action on how that fund needs to be accessible, additional. It needs to be grants, not loans, because people who are contributing the least to climate change, who are displaced, should not be having the burden of having to pay for losses and damages that are not caused because of their own. And the intrinsic nexus, which specifically the region here we're talking about of conflict, climate, multiple displacements due to either conflict or climate change, and the compounding impacts, I think governments and national authorities have a huge role to play. From what we're seeing also is international systems and international assistance, support, funding are very siloed. So if you look at the architecture and the system that we're in right now, we've got the DRR that is linked to maybe the Disaster Risk Management Authority, etc. We have then funding coming through economic development, which is through Economic or Finance Ministry. Then we have humanitarian assistance that might be through the Prime Minister's Office or maybe Disaster Management or Resettlement Ministry. Then we have climate change that goes through the Environment Ministry. So we have even in a national context, a very siloed approach of how planning, national planning happens. So and this is where I think governments play a huge role at country level. It's key to look at how do governments and country level actually coordinate this better to ensure that populations are not at the forefront of climate impacts and that they are looked after in all these siloed approaches that we are working on, the policies but also funding. And how does that funding then go to communities so that they can access it and they can make decisions, informed decisions? Because though our approaches maybe on funding and policies are siloed, needs on the ground and what they're facing is not siloed. They wouldn't come and tell, as NGOs, when we're there on the ground, and NRC can speak to this quite clearly, I think. When you're on the ground, they don't come to us and say, oh, you're humanitarian, so I'm only going to come to you for humanitarian, whatever I need from you for humanitarian, and then go to somebody else for something else. For them, their needs are diverse, and it can be multiple needs at the same time, and today one need can be overwhelming compared to something else, which might be long-term. Today it's, I need shelter, I need food, but then also I need to educate my children, I need a livelihood, I need to get back into my home, or I need to be able to return, I need to look at my, how do my indigenous practices or culture is impacted. We're not siloed when it comes to individuals, just like you and I, right? So how do we as NGOs, governments, UN agencies, how do we try and be more, when we approach subjects like this, when we approach displacement, when we approach climate change and conflict and these multiple layers of complexities, how do we take that into consideration when we're doing our planning, strategies, policies, and then action on the ground for funding to reach them at the same time so that they're able to then not have these siloed ways of getting assistance as well. So that's a bit of my reflection from having all these conversations, and we are at a key moment in this COP. We have a Relief, Recovery, Peace Day that also looks at adaptation, financing, climate financing, going to conflict and fragile contexts, like in the region of Middle East and North Africa, for example, where there is a huge gap of funding going through. And the money spent on adaptation, for example, reduces risk and minimize the impacts of people who can be better prepared to face climate impacts and displacement, so that we're better prepared. So when they're displaced, how do we prepare them to face multiple displacement, but at the same time build their own resilience, so that when a loss and damage happens, or when they are displaced, that they are not going back to zero or minus, but they're actually going, okay, we know what's coming, we can prepare ourselves. How can we then take that preparedness level so that we're not going back to zero or minus? This is just my reflections for the moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. This was very good. You know, I know you, we put you on the spot, and so thank you, Nishani. Samah was, you know, she's very excited about what we said, so please go ahead.
Just to clarify as well, yes, there is siloed funding streams, right? And we do need to see harmonization in terms of financing so that it reaches people in the most effective ways. But what we're also concerned about is overseas development assistance being used and humanitarian assistance being used to tackle climate change and being redirected. What we need to see, and we need to be clear about, is that financing has to be new, it has to be additional, it has to be multi-year and predictable. You know, we don't want to see double counting, or these very smart calculations that are being made by donors. We do desperately need to see, yes, a more harmonized approach that's streamlined, but the financing is already incredibly inadequate. And so we don't want to see humanitarian assistance being redirected. This financing has to be additional.
I think this is what I understand from Nishi, because otherwise, you know, this is what we are suffering since Copenhagen. That when we talk about the ODA, we are hearing that we are very close to the 100 million per year, 100 billion per year. But in reality, we don't feel it doing anything in terms of mitigation or adaptation. So this means that it's not only that we need to have more funds. Actually, the word more is very simple to what, when I heard about how many millions were put in the loss and damage fund, you know, does not cover even 1%, nothing. 1% of one disaster what we heard in the last year. So the amount is very symbolic. It's just like if you are going with some flowers to the people who are, you know, they met the disaster, which means nothing for them. So yeah, I think we need to have serious discussion about how much funding, and this is, I think, one of the things that we need also to think about. We have to put a figure for the loss and damage. Someone has to say, what is the target? How much we are seeking for? If I say now that $500 million is not enough, which is not enough, but what is the target? That's something that we need to work on, because we want to know also how much, what's the gap? Where is the gap between what we have now and what we are supposed to? And this means a lot of, again, data and information and studies and so on. Let me now open the floor for our audience here. If we have, and also please from the technical support, if anyone has a question on I don't know, you can tell me, please, if you have anything. Please let me know if, okay, I will be waiting for, yes, I'll go from the right and then left. It's to make the gender balanced. We had more Adiso, I think it is Adiso? Yes. Yes, please.
That's me. Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I first of all want to congratulate RAED for initiating this session, because I think it's fit for purpose. We are exactly at the right time to start thinking about the importance of displacement in the loss and damage topic. And I think this deserves congratulations. So thanks for the leadership. My name is Kosivia Desu, so I'm working for the Global Network for Disaster Reduction. And we have got also a similar project called Making Displacement Safer in Iraq region. And we've understood very quickly that the intersectionality between climate change as a risk driver, as Alice said it, and the consequences, the different type of consequences that climate change can do to. One of the major consequences we've identified in Iraq, and as people of the region, please tell me if I'm wrong, is conflict. So we know Iraq is a fragile country, but climate change is enhancing that fragility and is again pushing people out of the borders of Iraq than ever. So I want to ask Alice, in your work as IDMC, have you identified any, and you've raised it in your presentation, but you didn't mention any of them, so which are the intersectional causes that climate change is responsible of, and how is climate change increasing the displacement in those multiple areas? I'm not sure if I'm clear, if you get it.
It's clear.
Thank you so much.
Thank you much, Adly. Thank you. But I wanted to hear from you first what GNDR is doing in this. If you are from GNDR, I wanted to hear something about GNDR and displacement and the whole overall strategy. Of course, I can say something, but I would like also to hear from you.
I'm happy that you say you can say something because you are a board member of GNDR, so probably you know better than myself. But just to say that GNDR is, if you see our call to action before this COP, we put displacement as one of the key topics that we want the negotiator to really stick on. And we will place the loss and damage under the displacement under the loss and damage fund as one of the consequences, and the very tangible. Alice has given a lot of number today. We talk about 2,000 displacement. 2 million, is that what you say, per year?
No, 25.
No.
20.
Last one,
No.
32.
I said 25 million on average annually.
Yeah.
25 million.
Can we imagine that? 25 million. And that's average, meaning that in some countries it's more than that, in some regions more than that. So
It's globally, huh?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So, in gender, we believe that displacement is part of loss and damage, but also in terms of action, we have worked with some displaced communities that we've tried to understand the problem. We've organized what we call the urban lab, where we get displaced people, local communities, UN staff, national authorities to reflect on how we can really handle the displacement and facilitate the displacement. Yesterday we made a difference between migration and displacement. And so those who are forced to displace, why have they displaced from their first home? What are their needs in their destination? And how can we ensure that they feel secure in their new home? So we've worked on that, and we have a lot of information that are available on our website of sure, but also that Dr. Emad can give you more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Adisu. By the way, it took me some time to convince GNDR members, but this was like 10 or more than 10 years ago, to put the word displacement in the strategy of GNDR. It took some time, people were not convinced, but now I see GNDR is leading and one of the key actors in this domain. Alice, you got a question from Adisu, and I have also an answer for this, but please go ahead.
Thank you very much for the question. And just to make sure that I understand it well, it's more like if I can develop a bit further how climate change is exacerbating the drivers of displacement, since I said that it's more like a amplifying risk. But I think we have actually many examples that can illustrate this. I think one of the most typical is that, we know that climate change in many places, and including in the MENA region, for instance, is making some regions drier. It's creating water, increasing water insecurity, water scarcity, leading to water insecurity as well. But I would say more generally that we know that climate change by all the environmental degradation that it's causing, is affecting resources that are already scarce in many regions, and that those resource scarcity can create loss of livelihoods for many populations who at some point can decide to move or are forced to move because they don't find anymore the resources and the livelihood that they need on their places of origin. And those populations are moving, and sometimes the host communities are not always prepared for hosting those communities, so it can create tension between communities just because it creates like tension around resources that are scarce not only in the place of origin but also in the place that people choose to move where. And that's, in my case, in my view, like a typical illustration of how climate change is exacerbating something. I mean, we know that conflict around resources are already existing, but climate change is creating additional pressure on resources that are already scarce. And this resource scarcity is not always a result of climate change. I mean, we need to also acknowledge that sometimes there is mismanagement of resources. But climate change is making the situation even worse. So that's what I mean when I said that climate change is amplifying risk that in many situations are already there because also of other factors, and climate change is like, making the situation worse. And that's the typical case also between pastoralists and farmers that we heard a lot in the Sahel, for instance. So that's one example. I mean, we talk a lot about also like people who are already displaced because of other reasons, conflict in particular, and climate change is in this situation as well, making the situation even more complicated because people who are already displaced move in an environment that can also be degraded. I mean, for instance, I did a lot of my research in Bangladesh a couple of years ago. I mean, we know that there is now this massive Rohingya camp in Bangladesh, and if you go there, I mean, those refugees, I mean, I'm not calling them refugees because technically they are not called like that, but those Rohingya people, I mean, they are for now many years settled in a place in Bangladesh that is exposed to flooding and cyclones every year. So not only they live in already very precarious conditions, but in addition to that, the environment where the camp is settled is disastrous and extremely vulnerable to hazards. And climate change, by increasing the frequency and intensity of such hazards, is making the situation even more complicated. So, and those kind of examples can be demultiplied.
Thank you, Alice. I also would like to add something to what you said, but I will give Samah first to reflect.
I mean, just quickly, as I mentioned in my remarks as well, Iraq is a case study we've been looking at NRC for years now, and we've documented the upward trend of displacement, climate-induced displacement. But why are people so vulnerable and fragile? It's because of years of conflict that have destroyed systems, destroyed infrastructure, destroyed any capacity for national planning as well. So in a place like Iraq that's coming out of conflict, where the country could actually see some positive developments in terms of economic recovery from conflict, they're now being hit, populations are being hit by extreme drought, right? So farmers, communities are seeing their livelihoods, the little livelihood they had from the agricultural production, completely vanish. You go to places, and I've been to places like the marshes, the ancient marshes are vanishing before our eyes. This is not a future prospect, it's happening now. And people, buffalo farmers and herders, are leaving, right, on a really rapid scale. They're leaving these areas and moving inwards. Now, we're not seeing the resources there in place to account for and address secondary displacement. And this is, I think, an issue. Right now, and as Alice was saying, the focus is on internal displacement. We're not seeing people actually leave countries, at least not in the region, because of climate change. But this may soon change, and it could actually be a phenomenon that increases over time. So I think that needs to be part of the planning.
Thank you, Samah. And let me add also that it was very clear in Sudan, for example, in Darfur, the link between the drought and the conflict that happened in Sudan. And this was, actually more than 10, 15 years ago. And a study that RAED was engaged with in 2009 and 2010, we visited Syria. And I can tell you that in some parts which later the conflict was very intense, it was the same areas when we found that, because of the drought happening in this area, people were, their livelihoods were very much affected by drought and by the climate issues. And later it was, the areas of conflict was higher and it was more intense in the areas where it had the drought more. So they are definitely, there is a link definitely between the two, the internal displaced people and the conflict and also the drought. But let me tell you, Samah, that there is also some, I wouldn't say it is proof, but especially when it comes to cross-border, many of the young people who are going on the illegal migration from the north of Africa, it's because of, the economic and the pressures that is already on, especially on the rural areas, and the young people, they don't have jobs, and then they go for the illegal, and so it's also cross-border at some point. And in the region, in the MENA region, it's especially that we are the south of the Mediterranean and North Africa, so it's much easier for the people to think about the north, and that's why it's also affecting the EU somehow, and they are thinking about it because of that. Alice, okay.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to compliment because it's true that in terms of data, at least at IDMC, we don't speak about cross-border displacement, and we cannot quantifying it. But to complement what Emad just said, I like also to use the example of, if you look at sub-Saharan Africa, you take a farmer who is leaving his village to move into the city, or eventually even to the neighboring country, or even trying to cross the Mediterranean to reach the coast of Europe. In the case of many persons depending on natural resources today, when their livelihoods is dependent on their ability to crop their lands, and is depending on crops. How do you make the distinction between climate factors and economic factors for persons who are so dependent on their environment to sustain their livelihoods? In many cases already today, in my opinion, what we call economic migration is for many places already partly also climate migration, because when the environment is degraded because climate change is degrading the resources, how do you decide if the person is moving because he or she has lost her livelihoods, or because the environmental degradation has rendered his crop so impossible that the person has lost his livelihood? I think you get my point. In many situations, those factors are so intertwined that I don't think it's always possible actually to make the distinction. So probably climate change is already a factor also leading to regional and international migration. It's just that those factors are so intertwined that in terms of research we need much more efforts to be able to better understand this complexity and these different drivers.
The point that I am almost 100% sure about, that all the people who are sitting in the negotiation rooms, they know what we are talking about, and they inside themselves, they know that what we are saying is true, but unfortunately this is not reflected in the decisions they are making in whatever we are talking about, funding or about decisions coming from the COPs, at least in the and for the time being. So I think Sana, you wanted to say something here. Yes, right?
Thank you, Dr. Emad. I'm Afif from LTA Tunisia. It's part of RAED network. Thank you for organizing the event and for the insightful interventions. My question is regarding a point raised by Ms. Sameh regarding the target. First of all, as Dr. Emad said, who is the target? This is one. Second, how to approach this target, these vulnerable. So we are talking about many, many reasons for placement or climate migration. So who are the target and how to approach them to make strategies at local or national levels? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Afaf. Samahi would like to answer this.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of financing, right, I can answer in regards to targets for financing. I think now with the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund, we need to see, I think, transparency in the way the decisions are being made. In terms of which entity the financing will be channeled to. Here we can't neglect non-state actors and local actors and communities, and ensuring that financing for those who are really suffering on the front lines of the climate crisis reaches, people in need, and these population groups. I think that it needs to be transparent, it needs to be equitable as well, and ensure that women, minorities, indigenous communities as well, who are suffering as part of conflict and fragile affected contexts, need to be prioritized when it comes to financing. And as I was saying before, I think we need to ensure there's flexibility. What we're seeing at the moment is a trend of risk aversion when it comes to donors who do not want to provide funding to conflict-affected regions like the Middle East and North Africa because of the risks they attach to funding. This needs to be lifted, and it needs to be lifted fast because climate change is happening at a rate that people cannot adapt to. So I think that these are the technical discussions that need to be had by multilateral donors, IFIs, and government donors when it comes to ensuring financing reaches conflict contexts. The risks need to be lifted around this. And I think, as I was saying, multi-year funding. We need predictable funding in order to rebuild infrastructure, in order to build resilience. And that won't happen through one-off payments. It needs to be on a longer-term basis. That's what we've seen throughout development funding, humanitarian funding. We need to see this with climate financing as well.
Thank you, Samah. I think we have also one intervention here. Please go ahead.
Hello everyone. How are you? I am Omar from Jordan, and I'm so happy to be here with you. First of all, I would like to thank you so much for having us and for highlighting this great topic to talk about. Firstly, I would like to agree with Alice when she was talking about that people who displaced because of wars are much more than who displaced because of disasters, especially in MENA region. And because of that, as you know, that Jordan is one of the biggest host communities of refugees. So my question to you is about the climate refugee nexus that has launched by His Majesty King Abdullah II last year in Sharm el-Sheikh. How do you feel that this nexus will help in addressing displacement and mobility and its relevant to the climate change consequences? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Omar. I was delighted to attend today the meeting that was attended by the Prime Minister from Jordan and the IUCN Pavilion, and initiating also on the refugees, the Climate Refugees Initiative by the Kingdom of Jordan. Samah, do you want to connect to that, or you?
I mean, I don't have the details that you have, so maybe you can discuss. I mean, when it was announced by King Abdullah last year at Sharm el-Sheikh, it was very welcomed because we need to start having this discourse, right? There is a connection on the impact of climate change on refugees and displaced populations. We need to start looking at the holistic planning as well. But I don't have more details about this. I wish maybe the government would release more details, but maybe you have.
No, well, I raised not a concern, but I'm happy that at least an initiative comes from the region and from Jordan.
Yeah.
I think we need to put more emphasis on what do we mean by, the purpose, the objectives, who is going, because I know that Jordan has been always suffering, Jordan and Lebanon, of the refugees. And so Egypt also has many refugees. But the issue is, what are the elements that we are going to provide for the displaced? I would like to put it more on the displaced, people, and so we need more engagement in the initiative. It's a very good thing to go to be coming from the region, and also we want to see how how much resources it has and how it's going to be developed. But definitely, it's something that we need to support and to work with the other. I'm talking about us. I'm talking about Jordan, and to work with other actors and relevant partners. I still have 5 minutes exactly as this shows. Please, can you give the mic there? Please go ahead. Introduce yourself and make your point or question.
Thank you so much to the panelists. My name is Caitlin Hughes with Solar Cookers International. And so a question for Sama. What opportunity do you see for renewable appropriate technologies like solar thermal cooking, and also an invitation to discuss more and share more information with anybody?
Only for Samah, not to anyone else. So talk about solar cooking. Go ahead,
No, I could start, but we also have guests as well,
Yes.
and our colleagues here who can add to this. Just quickly, I think, yes, we are seeing the potential of solar energy. This is being integrated now in humanitarian responses, which is needed. We need to see faster action, right? And I will say this, it's not just about governments and donors. It's about humanitarian actors as well, taking on a more climate resilient approach when it comes to programming and the responses that we provide. We need to be able to implement sustainable approaches, and I think solar energy, renewable energy, needs to be harnessed more, especially in the Middle East and North Africa, where we have the sun, we have the wind, we have the potential and capacity to draw on this. So I would just say that it's being done. It needs to be faster, though. But I don't know.
But definitely, yes.
Maybe green technology. It's better to go.
Yeah, of course. But the point is, we need to have always smart and green solutions. I'm talking about the vulnerable communities as a preventive measure, and I'm also talking about the relocated communities when they are displaced. So definitely, it's something that it has to be part of the solution. We have to use all the green solutions, sustainable solutions. This will make, of course, things much better as for the communities, and also for the contribution at the global level for the mitigation and adaptation as well. Anyone else would like to add? Anyway, yes, please go ahead. Here in the back. Please introduce yourself and your point, comment, question.
Ismail Noman with the Publish What You Pay organization. You have really made a very comprehensive presentation in all aspects, and you all mentioned the role of the NGOs and CSOs. It's very interesting. What do you think? In particular, that such an organization like mine, Publish What You Pay, could really do in order to help in this very important role that you'll be playing. What do you expect?
Can you repeat the name again of the organization?
Ismail. Publish What You Pay organization. Publish What You Pay.
So you release data on financing, right? This, yeah.
Originally, but now we are moving to energy transition. Because that's going to end now. The data information, regarding the fossil fuels, oil and gas. The oil companies has to publish, and the government has to confirm where but that's now, that's the end of it. We are going to see the end of it because of the climate change and the fossil fuels is going to be slowly, not being used. So now we are moving to energy transitions, ourselves also as an activity. If you could just.
I mean, I don't know if fossil fuels are still not being used. Unfortunately, they're still being used, but so there still needs to be transparency around that use and accountability. Yeah. I think data is important. I don't know if Alice wants to say anything about data.
Unfortunately, I'm sorry, I don't know the type of data or information that your organization is collecting, so I'm not sure I can really answer your question, but I would say that any type of information that you can raise for making the case that mitigation is extremely important to prevent and reduce the risk that people can suffer from climate change is what your organization should do.
Well, thank you very much, Alice. I see the red counting came up here, and I have to close this side event. Let me thank you very much. I have some concluding remarks here, but it seems like the time is over. But at least we have emphasized on the issue of displacement and the link, the very clear link with the loss and damage. We talked about the need to have more resources, much more resources. We talked about the capacity development that we need at the local and the national level. We wanted to have also, of course, if we have all this, we have to have policies at the national level, even at the local level, and of course at the regional level. There is the very clear emphasis on the role of data and information. Without it, we cannot move forward. There is also very clear recommendation coming that we have to work in partnership between governments, local authorities, NGOs, communities. They have to be part, like Nishi when she said that, they have to be part when we are discussing the loss and damage. We are not in this room, cannot decision on behalf of the people. The people have to take they have to take the decision by themselves, and they have to be included. So at the end of the session, I would like to thank my colleagues, my sisters here and friends, partners, Samah, Nina, thank you very much, Nina, Alice from IDMC, Marie-Therese from HEAD, and all the speakers here. I received actually a message from League of Arab States saying that they were, they had some visitors in their pavilion and they couldn't leave them, and they are very sorry that they did not join. But I know, and you all know, that RAED and League of Arab States are with NRC, the organizers of this side event. So thanks to all the partners. And of course, I cannot leave without thanking all of you, the participants here, for coming and also for sharing your experience and for the dynamic session we had. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon again, not on loss and damage, but on solutions. Thank you.